The Alaska Highway is more than just a scenic drive, it's a vital artery that pulses with the life of the North. Stretching over 1,300 miles from Dawson Creek in British Columbia to Delta Junction in Alaska, this legendary road carves its way through some of the most breathtaking and remote landscapes on the continent. For Alaska, the highway is the state's economic and social lifeline, connecting isolated communities to the rest of the U.S. and the world beyond, all by way of Canada's rugged northern wilderness. Every day, trucks, cars, and families traverse this route, braving unpredictable weather and long distances to keep Alaska supplied and connected. For decades, this route has stood as a powerful symbol of seamless U.S.-Canada cooperation. Goods, services, and people have moved freely across the border, supported by a spirit of mutual trust and shared purpose. The border crossings, once just routine stops, became gateways to opportunity and friendship. Along the highway, small towns and villages have flourished, their residents growing together over generations. They share not only services and infrastructure but also culture, traditions, and a sense of resilience born from their remote environment. The uninterrupted flow of traffic has always been taken for granted, a constant in an unpredictable world. The highway is essential for time-sensitive shipments, fresh produce that must reach stores before it spoils, critical oil field equipment needed to keep industries running, and countless other goods that sustain daily life in the North. Families moving to new homes, businesses restocking their shelves, and even emergency services all depend on the reliability of this route. For many, the highway is not just a road but a lifeline that supports their hopes and dreams. The idea that this vital connection could ever be threatened by politics or international disputes seemed unthinkable until early 2025, when the unimaginable happened. Suddenly, diplomatic tensions erupted between the US and Canada, turning the Alaska Highway from a symbol of unity and cooperation into a flashpoint of conflict and uncertainty. Protests flared at border crossings, and officials scrambled to find solutions. The trust that had underpinned generations of partnership began to crack. Communities and industries that once felt secure now found themselves on edge, facing an uncertain future as the lifeline they depended on hung in the balance. The crisis began when President Trump announced a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian goods, aiming to rebalance trade. Delivered with fiery rhetoric, the move shocked Canada and signaled a shift from partnership to confrontation. Trump's administration, backed by key officials, dismissed concerns about a trade war, insisting the U.S. held all the leverage, even hinting at extreme measures. The tariffs ignored the deep integration of the two economies where supply chains cross the border daily. Canada, led by Prime Minister Trudeau, faced a dilemma: capitulate and appear weak, or retaliate and risk economic fallout. The world watched as the stage was set for a dramatic showdown, with millions of livelihoods at stake. The US had made its move, now Canada had to respond. Canada didn't back down. In the face of mounting pressure and the threat of US tariffs, Canadian officials stood firm, determined to protect their interests and send a message that they would not be intimidated. The standoff was about more than just economics. It was about sovereignty, pride, and the ability to defend national interests on the world stage. British Columbia's Premier David Eby announced a bold plan. If US tariffs took effect, BC would impose tolls on commercial vehicles using its highways to Alaska. This wasn't just a threat, it was a carefully calculated move, designed to hit where it hurt most. The highways through BC are a lifeline for Alaska, connecting the state to the rest of the US and the world. The Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act gave BC the power to act instantly, targeting the critical land bridge Alaska depends on. With this legislation, BC could respond to US actions in real time, without waiting for federal approval. It was a show of provincial strength and a signal that BC was ready to take matters into its own hands. The message was clear: hurt us, and we'll hit a vital US interest. The tolls would not just inconvenience American truckers, they would disrupt supply chains, raise costs, and create uncertainty for businesses on both sides of the border. It was a high-stakes game of economic brinkmanship. The proposed tolls alarmed Alaskans, threatening the flow of goods and raising the specter of economic pain on both sides. For many in Alaska, the highway is a lifeline, bringing in everything from food and fuel to medical supplies. The possibility of delays or increased costs sent shockwaves through communities and businesses alike. The act was temporary, but its impact was immediate. BC was ready to defend itself, not just wait for Ottawa. The provincial government moved quickly, holding emergency meetings and preparing to implement the tolls at a moment's notice. It was a rare display of provincial autonomy in the face of international pressure. This was a calculated risk, potentially disrupting local economies and inviting U.S. retaliation. Small towns along the route worried about losing business, while local leaders debated the long-term consequences. Yet, for many, the willingness to stand up for BC's interests outweighed the risks. By weaponizing the highway, BC turned a national dispute into a local crisis. The tension was palpable at border crossings and along the highways, as truckers, officials, and communities braced for what might come next. The front line of Canada's economic defense was now its own roads. In this standoff, every mile of pavement became a symbol of resistance, and every checkpoint a reminder that the stakes were higher than ever before. News of BC's tolls hit Alaska hard. While most cargo arrives by sea, the highway is irreplaceable for high-value, time-sensitive goods, fresh food, oil parts, and more. The Alaska Trucking Association warned that tolls would drive up prices for essentials in a state already facing high costs. Small businesses, construction projects, and families moving to or from Alaska all rely on this route. The threat of tolls created uncertainty and fear of isolation, exposing Alaska's vulnerability, its dependence on a foreign land route. For years, goodwill with Canada was taken for granted. Now, it was in jeopardy. The dispute forced Alaskans to confront how international politics could disrupt daily life. The highway's constriction was a direct threat to the Alaskan way of life. BC's toll plan sparked a wave of provincial countermeasures across Canada. Ontario slapped a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., targeting states dependent on Canadian power. Yukon halted purchases of American alcohol for government stores and limited U.S. companies' access to contracts. BC expanded its retaliation, banning alcohol from Republican-led states and urging agencies to buy Canadian. These actions, though varied, sent a united message. Canada would not absorb the pain of a trade war alone. Provinces took the lead, showing they could defend their interests when Ottawa wouldn't act fast enough. The U.S. now faced a complex, regionally driven resistance from its northern neighbor. In a bold move, the United States countered Canada's highway toll proposal with a threat of its own: to bypass Canadian ports entirely on Alaska-bound cruises. This was a direct shot at British Columbia's thriving tourism industry, which relies heavily on the steady stream of cruise ship visitors. The message was clear: if Canada made it harder for American goods to reach Alaska, the U.S. would make it harder for Canadian ports to profit from American tourists. Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan quickly took the lead, advocating for a temporary waiver of the Passenger Vessel Services Act. This century-old law requires foreign-flagged cruise ships to stop at a foreign port, usually in Canada, on their way from Seattle to Alaska. By waiving it, ships could sail directly from Seattle to Alaska, cutting Canada out of the lucrative cruise circuit. The implications for British Columbia were enormous. Ports like Vancouver and Victoria stood to lose millions in revenue, not just from docking fees, but from the thousands of tourists who spend money in local shops, restaurants, and attractions. The threat escalated the conflict, turning it from a dispute over trade in goods to a battle over the very lifeblood of BC's coastal communities. This wasn't an empty threat. The U.S. had used similar tactics before, and the cruise industry had the flexibility to change routes quickly. The possibility of ships simply sailing past Canadian ports was both credible and deeply concerning for local officials and business owners. Thousands of tourism jobs were suddenly at risk. From port workers and tour guides to hotel staff and shop owners, entire communities faced the prospect of a summer without cruise ship visitors. The economic ripple effect would be felt far beyond the docks, threatening the stability of businesses that depend on seasonal tourism. The tit-for-tat escalation deepened the rift between the two neighbors. Each side searched for new ways to apply pressure, turning what began as a trade dispute into a broader test of economic resilience and political will. The cruise industry, once a symbol of cross-border cooperation and prosperity, was now a high-stakes bargaining chip in a rapidly widening dispute. The uncertainty left passengers, workers, and entire cities on edge, unsure of what the next season would bring. As the standoff continued, the economic fallout threatened to spread far beyond the border, casting a long shadow over the future of tourism and trade in the Pacific Northwest. Alaska, caught in the crossfire, tried to de-escalate. The State House passed a resolution affirming Canadian sovereignty and condemning threats from Washington. The message: Alaskans respect their Canadian neighbors and reject extreme rhetoric. At the same time, the resolution criticized BC's tolls, arguing they unfairly punished Alaskans for federal disputes. Alaska's leaders called for cooperation, urging Canadian provinces to reconsider measures that hurt ordinary people. The move highlighted Alaska's unique position, dependent on Canada, yet subject to U.S. policy. Alaskan lawmakers sought regional diplomacy, hoping to find local solutions amid national conflict. Their plea was a reminder of the powerful regional identity that transcends borders. Even in crisis, Alaska reached out for peace and partnership. Despite political tensions, the bonds between Alaska, the Yukon, and BC endured. Local leaders and citizens worked to maintain cross-border friendships, refusing to let politics sever decades of cooperation. The Arctic Winter Games continued as planned, symbolizing the region's commitment to cultural and sporting ties. Chambers of Commerce and First Nations groups kept collaborating, and road crews coordinated on highway safety. These grassroots efforts countered divisive rhetoric, reminding everyone that the US-Canada relationship is about people, not just politics. Even as the crisis raged, the deep roots of friendship held firm, offering hope for reconciliation. By June 2025, an uneasy truce settled over the border. The most aggressive threats were paused, but tensions lingered. The crisis exposed vulnerabilities: Alaska's reliance on Canada, Canada's challenge in facing an unpredictable US, and the power of provinces to act independently. Both nations were forced to confront their interdependence and the fragility of their partnership. Yet, regional diplomacy and community ties provided hope for rebuilding trust. The tools of economic conflict remain on the table, ready if tensions flare again. The 2025 crisis is a cautionary tale. Even the strongest friendships can be damaged by confrontation and broken communication. The future depends on a return to mutual respect and negotiation. The hope is that leaders have learned this lesson, and that the world's longest undefended border remains a symbol of peace, not conflict.